whenever astronomers began to develop larger and larger light telescopes, they began to discover patches of space which had what they believed to be just a mass of gas and dust, which they called nebula. I always think of when I was a kid, I would go to the movie theater. That's before they outlawed smoking. And so if the movie was really boring, I would just look back at the smoke going up into the light from the camera, and it would just kind of float there in space and move around. And it's ash from the cigarette that's being caught there in the light. Well, that's what they thought these nebula were. They're regions of space which had a concentration of gas and dust, and the starlight that was coming through space was hitting it and causing it to glow. And they believe today they're nebula. However, when telescopes began to get larger and larger, eventually, when they were looking at some of these nebula, they began to recognize that they're pinpoint sources of light. You see them around the edges? I think this is a question on the test too, so pay close attention. So when they saw those pinpoint sources of light, you see them? That means it can't be dust, right? Because if it was just a mass of dust, you wouldn't see point sources of light. So what must those lights be for us to be able to see them? They must be stars. But they're so tiny, that means they're very far away. So in other words, it's a change of perspective, a radical change of perspective in astronomy. Because up until this point, you see the stars, the large stars in the foreground here? Up until this point, they thought that these were stars of our universe, and this was just a region that had a high concentration of dust. Makes sense, right? But when you can see point sources of light, that means that this isn't dust. So what is it? That's another universe. Quote, universe. They call them galaxies now. That's another galaxy distant from our galaxy. And so what happened was the universe suddenly got a lot bigger. You've heard the term interstellar space? Interstellar. So here's a star, and there's a star, so the distance with the space between those two stars is interstellar space. Up until the discovery of this, they thought that's all there was interstellar space. But now you have another galaxy. See it? And so we're in one galaxy, the Milky Way, which is the stars we see, and that's another galaxy. And there's a vast region of space in between that. We call that what? Intergalactic space. Okay, so interstellar space and intergalactic space. So when they discovered the point sources of light in the nebula, they realized that space is much bigger than they thought. That's a distant galaxy. Doesn't mean that there are not nebulas. It just means that some of the things they thought were nebulas were not nebulas. They were galaxies because they could recognize. Well, if dust was reflecting light, then it would be even more diffuse, right? If it's being reflected. To be able to create that kind of point source at that distance, it would have to be something large enough that could create light that would make it to us.
Right.
And if it's that intense, it must be far away because it's so much smaller. You can see that dot right there.
Yeah.
This between that dot and this dot. And you can even see that there are dots that are part of the stars that are in the Milky Way. They're just sort of in the way. But anyway, that's the conclusion that they arrived at. And that was the first detection of intergalactic space. Yes, Scott?
I have a question. Okay, so if that's the stars are like, outlining that. Mm-hmm. So the others, they're further away, correct, than these
right.
other stars around it, correct?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Because they're so small, that means they must be further away. And because you can see that they're point sources, they must be stars and not just light reflecting off of gas and dust.